It is truly wonderful to see so many fundraising professionals getting interested and excited about Russell James. He has been someone that for decades I have looked to for direction and just really building my knowledge base around planned giving and major giving. I've been in this industry almost 30 years and seen a lot of changes, and he's been there for all of those changes, and I'm sure there are many of you here today who feel that same way about him. I'm really honored to mention to you also that this all came about because back in October of last year, one of our former board members, Emil Kalina, mentioned that Russell had just completed a book and it was in beta testing, and he would love to see us introduce that here at KLOVE. And we started thinking about it, and we said that's really what we hoped for the ministry center once we got up and going. So to be able to host this as really our first external event for the community is a big deal, and we're excited to be able to do that. When Emil made that proposition, we said, yes, absolutely. Then we started figuring out all the details of that, and here we are today. The book series is 3 parts. You'll receive books when you leave. We have bags, and then if you're joining us live stream, please just send an email to generosity@klove.com, and we'll send you the books for download as well. One great thing about Dr. James is that all of his material is available at no charge online. He gives away all of his books. He gives away all of his material so that we can really strengthen our ability to serve our supporters well in the communities. This is a little bit of a move for Russell from what he's done previously. He's always written from a secular perspective, and with these books, the Biblical Fundraiser, obviously, he's bringing Christ into it, and for us at KLOVE, we really love this because it really fits with our mission of inspiring people to move closer to Jesus, and certainly with what he's prepared, we think that aligns beautifully. I want to also be sure and recognize our sponsors for today. Emil Kalina, as I mentioned, is one of the founders of the James Foundation, named in honor of his son. And he and his foundation are sponsoring this today, as well as Eddie Thompson and Thompson and Associates. They are friends of the ministry and an organization that we've worked with for a number of years with estate planning for our nonprofit, and some of you may have done the same. So I'm going to invite Eddie out to the stage, Dr. Eddie Thompson, and he's going to make a few remarks and introduce our speaker for today.
Well, we want to take a moment to thank Natalie. You would not believe how much time and energy she's put into this. She has a great team. I'm going to ask her team or those involved with KLOVE to stand. Thank you all for what you do, and appreciate your leadership and what you do for the kingdom. Thank you. I'm going to ask also board members and former board members of KLOVE to stand. We want to thank you for your commitment to this program. Emil, who else? So as you know, Emil is also a sponsor. I'm going to ask Casey Powell, who works with us at Thompson Associates, to stand. He's the president of our organization. He keeps it running every day. He's the young man in the company. What if, I want you to think about this, what if every child of God really considered what God has placed in their hands, and they made the decision to leave some of their assets or give some of their assets during life to the kingdom and to kingdom work? Can you imagine the difference it would make? I'm going to ask Russell James to come out. Russell is our speaker today. You may know a few things about him. He's a professor at Texas Tech University in gift planning. He's a retired attorney, is the way I would describe you. University president at one point in time, now a professor. But I want to introduce you today to Russell James as Brother Russell James. This man has an amazing heart. We prayed together. We've talked over the years. This book has been in process, or these books, in process about 4 years, dedicating 3 hours every day to this project. It is our prayer And it's our belief that this will shake the kingdom for good. We're missing an opportunity. We're not fully exhorting our brothers and sisters in how to enjoy their wealth. To help us today is Brother Russell James. Russell.
Thank you so much, Eddie.
You got one?
I got Well, thanks so much, Eddie. I appreciate that, and appreciate the opportunity to be able to share with you today. We're going to be taking a look at, I like speaking to fundraisers, and oftentimes when I speak, people want to know what is the latest, greatest, sort of best new results. And we're going to look at some of those latest, greatest, best new results. Once the slides get up here, I will be sharing some of those with you. But one of the things that is interesting is that many of these results, although they're brand new, they're actually going to be talking about concepts that are about 2,000 years old. This is what we're going to do is take a deep dive into both the latest results and also these 2,000-year-old best practices. So I'm going to start out with some good news. The good news is, if you want to effectively raise major gifts, the good news is this: everything you need to know about effective major gift fundraising is contained in just one sentence. But I'm also a lawyer. That means that statement is going to come with a disclaimer. My good news disclaimer is this: everything you need to know about effective major gift fundraising is contained in just one sentence, but this is the sentence. This is the earliest known record of what we call 1 Timothy 6:17 through 19. It's actually all just one sentence in the Greek. Now, don't worry. I'm not going to ask you to read Greek, much less all caps Greek with no spaces. And we're going to get to what the Bible says, and we're going to get to that passage. But first, well, I'm a professor and a researcher, so I'm going to start with some data. And I want to share with you the idea of what is missing from fundraising at churches and Christian organizations. Now, to understand that, we've got to start with what charitable organizations normally look like. Now, normally in charities in the U.S., the top 0.3% of donors will provide just over half of the money. Now, this is from a study that looks at a little over 8,500 charities across the country, both U.S. and Canada. That's what normal charitable fundraising looks like. Sorry, a little over 12,000 charities. Now, what would charitable giving look like if we just took out the lion's share of those chunk of big gifts? It would look like that. Why am I showing you that? Because that's what giving to churches in the United States looks like. Normally, the top 0.3% of donors provide just over the half of the money, but in churches, that same group provides only 14.4% of the money. Even the top 1% provides only about 19.6% of gift income. Something is missing. Let me show you some other data. This comes from the IRS, and this is looking at estate gifts. Now, first I'll give you the good news. As wealth increases, the likelihood that someone is going to have a gift to a religious organization in their estate plan, it goes up and up and up. Here's the flip side of that. As wealth increases, the share of charitable giving that goes to the church or religious organizations, that goes down and down and down. So what does this data tell us? It tells us that churches and religious organizations are really good at getting small gifts, and they're really bad at getting large ones. They're even good at getting small gifts from wealthy donors, but they're bad at getting large gifts from wealthy donors. What's missing? Well, it's not that wealthy people aren't Christian. The majority of millionaires in the world are Christian. It's not that wealthy Christians don't make large gifts. They just don't make them to the church and rarely to Christian organizations. These large gifts are missing, and I want to suggest something else is missing. It's the missing ministry of what we might call major gift fundraising. It is a scriptural ministry focused on the wealth holders, focused on the rich. This is a ministry that's often missing from the church. And this is the ministry that in 1 Timothy 6:17 through 19, Paul is telling Timothy about how to conduct this missing ministry. Now, there are many passages in the Bible written to the giver. This passage is different. It's different in a couple of ways. One way is that it's not written to the giver. It's written to the one whose job is to encourage generosity among the wealth holders. It's actually written to the fundraiser. Paul is outlining for Timothy the scriptural ministry of major gift fundraising. In fact, the Voice translation starts this with, "Here's what you say." Now, just to be offensive, I'm going to call this biblical fundraising, and let's take a bit of a deeper dive. First, we begin with what I call the offensive ministry. We begin with the people group. Biblical fundraising is a scriptural ministry focused on the wealth holders. Ordinary fundraising, it's just about getting cash. Now, let's start with the typical ministry before we get to the offensive one. Typical ministry, typical conversation. "Hi, I'm Bob. I'm the new youth minister." You're the what? "Oh, the youth minister. I'll be working with the young people in our church. I'll also be working on programs to reach out to other young believers in the community to minister to them as well." Now, let me make it offensive. "Hi, I'm Bob. I'm the new minister to the rich." You're the what? The minister to the rich. "I'll be working with the rich people in our church. I'll also be working on programs to reach out to other rich believers in the community to minister to them as well." Ooh, I don't know. That doesn't feel real comfortable. Now, first let me say, aside from this scripture, that Paul and James match. What do I mean by that? James warns against breaking community based upon wealth. That's his warning in James 2. That the idea of breaking community, the phrase used there means making distinction. It literally means to separate throughout or wholly. Two people come into the assembly and immediately say, "Oh, you don't belong together." Paul is saying we need a special ministry to the rich to pull them into fellowship. And in fact, the word that is used in this passage for sharing is koinonia sharing. In this case, koinonikos. Now, the koinonia, that is the fellowship community. And koinonia sharing, koinonikos, that is the goal of the encouraging of generosity. So James and Paul are saying the same things in two different ways. We need to bring those who are wealth holders into closer community. Key distinction number one. This is different because we're talking about wealth sharing, not income sharing. Income sharing is great, it's wonderful. That's not what this particular passage is talking about. This is one sentence in the Greek, and this one sentence, Paul references wealth 7 times. Talking about wealth is scary. He wants to make sure that you don't miss it, repeating those wealth phrases again and again. Our ordinary fundraising, it tends to stay stuck in the realm of disposable income decisions. We're not having wealth conversations. Now, to have a wealth conversation, you need to understand what wealth is. Number one, wealth is not income. Income is not wealth. You can have really high income and build absolutely no wealth. Famous celebrities and sometimes athletes often go bankrupt very quickly. High income, no wealth. You actually can have very high wealth and little income. This is not unusual. The wealthy often have low reportable income, but they own assets that go up in value. They just don't sell them, so they're reporting no income. Wealth is also different in how it's held. Income tends to be held in cash. Wealth is not held in cash. It's held in appreciated assets. Now, aside from there being a technical difference, there's also a spiritual difference. There are two types of bad stewards that are described in the New Testament. There is the binging bad steward, but there's also the burying bad steward. Now, when we go to a church teaching on stewardship, it is almost always focused on how not to be the binging bad steward. And that's wonderful, and that's great, and that's important, but Jesus actually told more stories about the burying bad steward. Parable of the talents, parable of the minas, parable of the rich fool. Now, when I say it's a spiritual issue, understand that this is something that relates to wealth, not having high income, which is a different issue altogether. So suppose you have a person who is being the burying bad steward. They've been richly blessed with wealth, and their plan is to bury it and die with it. Now, then we convince them to share 10% of their income. Yay, that's great. Actually, let's go beyond that. Maybe it's 30% or even 50%, and that is wonderful. And how does that affect their buried wealth? It doesn't. If anything, it simply slows the rate of additional accumulation to the buried wealth. And so when we look at Scripture, these are wealth conversations, not income sharing conversations. What was happening in the early church? Well, one of the things we learn from Acts 2 and Acts 4 is we get a lot of donor stories. In fundraising, we like to share donor stories, and it makes sense. It works. But notice, these are different than the donor stories we often share because these are asset donor stories. Notice in these passages, 4 different words are used to describe what's being given, and these are all asset-giving words. Lots of variety, all asset words. A piece of landed property, a field, possessions, goods, wealth, an estate, property, wealth, goods. That's the kind of giving that's being described here. This is not income sharing. Income sharing is wonderful, but this is a different kind of an animal. So don't just share donor stories, share donor stories about major gifts of wealth. And we see them everywhere. What about this? We're going to hear a story of a donor, and we get to find out what he was giving. Now Joseph, a Levite of Cyprian birth, who is also called Barnabas by the apostles, which translated means sons of encouragement, owned a tract of land. So he sold it, brought the money, and laid it at the apostles' feet. We even get one story where we not only know the person's name, the asset, we also know its fair market value, right? Mary of Bethany came with an alabaster vial, a very expensive perfume of pure nard, and she broke the vial and poured the perfume over his head. This perfume could have been sold for over 300 denarii. Notice when Jesus responds to this really expensive gift, he says, she has done a good work. Now, that's the same phrase that Paul is using here in this passage. The good work is how we enjoy our wealth. So the point is this: we want to not just tell donor stories, we want to tell asset donor stories. And we want to tell many of them for many different kinds of assets. And notice the variety that we see in the New Testament of all of these different asset descriptions and all of these different asset sharing gifts. What does this mean from a practical fundraising perspective? It means this: if you have someone who already cares about your cause, The single biggest transformation you can make with a donor is to get them to consider their wealth, not just their disposable income, their wealth as donation relevant. Now, let me jump from Scripture to some research findings. We actually did a deep dive research study looking at over 1 million nonprofit tax returns over a 6-year period in the U.S. to see what is it that predicts long-term contributions growth. Here's one comparison from organizations raising at least $1 million a year. On the one hand, we had organizations that both at the beginning and end of the 5-year period were raising only cash gifts. And we compared that growth rate with organizations that both at the beginning and at the end also were raising gifts of non-cash assets like securities. The organizations raising only cash gifts over this 5-year period on average had a total combined growth of 11%. That was the same as the inflation rate during that period of time. Cash-only organizations, they're just treading water. Notice for those that are receiving gifts of securities, both at the baseline and at the end, their growth rate in that interim period was 6 times greater. This is nonprofits nationally. This is not just some just-so story about what happened once at one place. This is what we see from massive data analysis. Another data result, this is when we see what happens to people's current giving after they add charity into the estate plan. You see, the truth of the matter is most people will never consider wealth sharing in their charitable giving. They will only consider gifts as a disposable income decision. And the first time that most people will ever commit to a gift from their wealth is when they do that in the estate plan. What happens after that decision? Looking at nationally representative study, tracking adults age 50 and above throughout their lives, we have the answer. These are the same people on the left in the white bars and on the right in the black bars, but after they add charity into their estate plan, their giving goes up on average 77% and is sustained 2 years, 4, 6, even 8 years later. It is a transformation for the donor when they make that first commitment to share from their wealth, not from income. So, by the way, this idea of starting the conversation on giving with estate planning, nothing new. That is exactly how Paul likes to open his conversation in 1 Timothy 6. He begins with estate planning. Brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. There's a second distinction that's important to keep in mind when it comes to giving in the New Testament. There are many passages in the Bible about giving. What we're looking at in this passage, and indeed in all of the passages after Acts, is not about giving, it's about sharing. I want to suggest to you that just as in the Old Testament, different gifts have different rules. We're not supposed to mix and match those rules. It ended up very poorly for those that did that in the Old Testament, and I think we should not do that as well. There are two very different words that are, unfortunately, oftentimes both translated just with the English phrase charitable giving. There is what we might call almsgiving. Now, that word in the Greek is eleemosune. Now, that means mercy, pity, alms. You might think of it as giving down. There's a very different kind of giving that also appears in the New Testament, and that is sharing a cross. Now, this sharing, which the phrase in this sentence is koinonikos, is koinonia sharing, sharing with the koinonia, the fellowship community. Notice the different rules for these different gifts. So let's look at an example of literally, in this case, giving down. And a man who had been unable to walk from birth was being carried, whom they used to set down every day at the gate of the temple, which is called Beautiful, in order for him to beg for eleemosune, for charitable gifts. Notice eleemosune matches with begging. From those entering the temple grounds, when he saw Peter and John about to go into the temple grounds, he began asking to receive a charitable gift, but the actual word is eleemosune. Now, Is giving down, or almsgiving, supposed to be secretive and hidden? Absolutely, yes, it is. Matthew 6, 2 through 4. So when you, the phrase here, give to the poor, it's eleemosune. Do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, so that they will be praised by people. Truly, I say to you, they have their reward in full. But when you, eleemosune, here translated, give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your charitable giving, but it's eleemosune, will be in secret. Now, I want to suggest to you that giving across, mutual sharing, is different. After the book of Acts, we actually see no usage of eleemosune. This new type of giving is sharing with the mutual fellowship community. This is koinonia sharing. And we see koinonia sharing is the phrase in our passage, also 2 Corinthians 8, Romans 15, 2 Corinthians 9, Hebrews 13, Galatians 6, Romans 12, Philippians 4. Now, this is different. This is not giving down to the outsider. This is sharing across with the brother or sister. An example of this we see when Paul calls this sharing koinonias, explaining at this present time your abundance will serve as assistance for their needs, so that their abundance may also serve as assistance for your need, so that there may be equality. Now, what about this kind of sharing? Is it supposed to be secretive and hidden? That's not what we see. In fact, 2 Corinthians 8:24, Paul says, therefore, openly before the churches, show them, this is literally in the face of the churches, show them the proof of your love and our reason for boasting about you. You want to see some interesting donor publicity? What about 2 Corinthians 9, 2 through 4? I have been boasting to the churches in Macedonia that you in Greece were ready to send an offering a year ago. In fact, it was your enthusiasm that stirred up many of the Macedonian believers to begin giving. I don't want to be wrong in my boasting about you. We would be embarrassed, not to mention your own embarrassment, if some Macedonian believers came with me and found that you weren't ready after I had told them. Now, ministry donors have always been named individually. We know about Mary. We know about Joanna. We know about Susanna. We know about Barnabas. We know about Phoebe. Just understand how extreme this donor publicity is. You have one place that says, I think we can make a gift to your project. Sounds like something we should do. You take that intention, you go broadcast it to the neighboring region and use it as motivation to get them to give, and then you come back to the people who said, yeah, we'll do something, and say, oh, wow, I told all of them about it. They were really motivated about your intention, and by the way, some of them are coming with me. Wouldn't it be horribly embarrassing for you if you don't openly, publicly show them the proof of your love after I told them that you were ready to do this, right? That's extreme. That's extreme donor publicity. So what's the main point? Main point is this. Koinonikus that we see in this passage is not the same as eleemosune. If we were reading in the Greek, you're not going to confuse those two words, right? Very different. Sharing with the fellowship community is not the same as almsgiving. Giving across is not the same as giving down. Don't mix and match those rules. Begging pairs with almsgiving. Major Gifts Fundraising is not almsgiving. Giving down, it is not eleemosune. I'm saying all that to make this point. If it feels like begging, you're doing it wrong. That's not what this is. That's not the type of gift we're talking about. So this major gift fundraising, what I've used the phrase biblical fundraising, is not begging. So what is it? The passage tells us what it is. Biblical fundraising is about asking the donor to, get this, to enjoy their wealth. Ordinary fundraising is about asking the donor to give up their money. So what is this idea of saying it's time for a joyride? Well, this passage is actually a list that explains how to enjoy your wealth. Why does God richly supply these things? All things, including wealth. The phrase here, Professor Abraham Mallerby writes it this way: this construction, ace plus the noun, expresses purpose. The infinitives thus describe how wealth is to be enjoyed, namely in the ways that it is used. Now, something you can't really see here in the English is that, as he often does, Paul here is writing in a poetic form called chiasmus. So a chiastic structure, it's from the Greek chi, which is an X, and it looks like an X. This is where you start with an idea, you end with an alternate version of that same idea, and then you rotate back and forth all the way down to the main point. And what's the main point here? The main point here is for the purpose of enjoyment. You're supposed to enjoy the wealth. Let's talk about that so you understand what the passage is saying there. First, let's begin at the beginning, which is exactly where Paul begins with his wealth conversation in 1 Timothy 6. What is the one thing that you can't do with wealth? You can't keep it, right? That was 10 verses earlier. For we've brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. Now notice, this is not a statement of faith, of theology. You can be the most committed atheist you want to be, and you know that's true, right? You can't take it with you. Solomon, of course, makes the same observation in Ecclesiastes. Now, we've got wealth, we've got it temporarily. What can we do with it? Until you lose it, which can come during this life, definitely at the end of this life, there are only 4 wealth management options. You can binge with it. That's excessive consumption. Solomon tried that out, more extreme than any of us will have the opportunity to do. And you know what happened? It led to depression. He actually writes, "And so I hated life." You can also bury it. You can bury it in the ground to lose it at the end of life. You can toil, that is, just keep hustling to bury even more in the ground to lose at death. Or you can enjoy it. Binge, bury, toil, or enjoy. Those are your 4 options. Now, by the way, this passage actually references this idea, specifically the idea of burying wealth, where it references setting their hope on the uncertainty of riches. That word also has a double meaning for setting their hope on buried riches or the hiddenness of riches. So let me get real practical for a moment. What happens when we choose to bury it and die with it? Think about what you've seen in your own life. Does dying with buried wealth lead to family harmony? Is family harmony usually better or worse off than if nothing had been left? Think about what are your experiences. What have you observed? Let me ask another question. In thinking about this process, I'll give you my perspective as an attorney. In law practice, what do we call it when family members spend money on lawyers to fight with each other over dividing up assets? Well, we call it divorce, or we call it probate. Now, Jesus tells the story of the rich fool who just stored up wealth and died with it. What prompted him to tell that story? It was a probate fight. Yeah. Now, someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." Notice what Jesus does. But he said to him, "You there, who appointed me a judge or arbiter over the 2 of you?" And then he turns. But he said to them, "Beware." He's using this probate fight that broke out in the middle of him as an example for the crowd to say, here's what's going to happen to your buried wealth. You're going to bury it. You're going to die with it. Look what it does to the family. Does dying with buried wealth lead to family wisdom? Well, Solomon puts it this way. So I hated all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool. Spoiler alert, he was a fool if you haven't read that part. Does dying with buried wealth lead to family wisdom? What do you think? Does an unexpected windfall of unearned death money make wise life choices more likely or less likely? Here's what the data shows. In National Study of Inheritors, well over a third had their net worth fall back to or below their pre-inheritance level within about 12 months. A more recent study estimates this likelihood as closer to half of those heirs are back to or below their initial net worth level within about 12 months. Now, which choice is most common among the wealthy? Binge, bury, toil, enjoy. So here's national data looking at the top 6% of wealth holders in this country, and it is showing you the rate of wealth accumulation that happens at different ages. For the top 6% of wealth holders, when they reach their 60s, we sort of have this idea of you save it up until you hit that retirement age. Maybe it's 65, maybe it's older, and then you spend it down. No, that's not what wealth holders look like. Their rate of wealth accumulation in their 60s is faster than it was in their 50s. Their rate of wealth accumulation in their 70s is faster than it was in their 60s. It's faster in their 80s than it was in their 70s, and believe it or not, it is faster still in their 90s than it was in their 80s. This rate of wealth accumulation just keeps going up and up and up. Now, I'm going through all of that to share this very important point with you as fundraisers. If the wealthy person fails to enjoy the wealth through their giving, they're going to bury it and they're going to die with it. Why should you feel super comfortable in asking somebody to make a gift of $40 million? Because you know what they're going to do with it if you're not successful. They're going to bury it and they're going to die with it. We know the end of that story, and it doesn't end well. Which choice does this ministry encourage? It encourages enjoy it. That's why God gave it to you, and here, let me show you the ways to enjoy it. Biblical fundraising is about asking the donor to enjoy their wealth. How can a person really enjoy their wealth? The next words give the details. First, you can have an enjoyable personal impact. The phrase here references good, whether it be seen to be so or not, and it is good work that accomplishes something. The next phrase, being rich in good works, this is a different kind of good, actually. It is a large accumulation of good that is worthy, honorable, noble, and seen to be so. It is beautiful good. So you can do intrinsic good work, and we're not saying don't be rich. We're saying be rich in even more ways. Be rich in beautiful good works. Not only that, you get a really attractive identity, a self-identity. The phrase that's used here it uses the Greek word "anai." This is the donor's "I am" statement. Same phrase that Jesus uses in many of his famous "I am" statements. Now, the adjective that is describing the "I am" statement, sometimes translated as generous, it means someone who is a good sharer of abundance. That is a joyful, abounding, abundant, rich sharer. And ultimately, we not only get this enjoyable self-identity of being a good sharer of abundance, but we also get an enjoyable social identity. That is, as a fellowship community sharer, a closely connected, closely bonded sharer with the fellowship community. Notice how Paul is phrasing his instructions to Timothy on how to do major gift fundraising. This phrasing is all about the donor's actions and the donor's impact, perhaps using a nonprofit as a helpful weapon or instrument. This is different than the small gift messaging that many nonprofits like to engage in, which is all about how great our nonprofit is, perhaps using the donor's money as a helpful weapon or instrument. This is about the donor and the donor's impact. So it's about my impact of my gift. The phrases that are used here both use a version of the word ergon. Now, what is that word for work, good works, to be rich in good works, to do good work? It's a work or worker who accomplishes something, a deed, action that carries out, completes an inner desire, intention, or purpose. Paul's instruction directs the donor to accomplish something. Notice he never just says, give money, give your money away. Nope, that's not going to get it done. You've got to accomplish something either intrinsically good or accomplish things that are beautifully good. Why is this important to understand this? Well, I had a friend, very effective major gift fundraiser. He was on a plane and people talking with the lady next to him about, what do? What is your work? And he explained to her, and she said, oh, I could never do your job. I couldn't ask people for money. He had an interesting response. He said, I don't ask people for money. I ask people to do things that happen to cost money. Notice that even though he wasn't coming from a scriptural perspective, he's using ancient language. The idea that I ask people to do good things that happen to cost money. See, the idea is, if you ask people for money, do people want to give money? Not particularly, right? But people do want to accomplish good things that reflect their inner values and their life story. That is exciting. We don't ask people for money. We ask people to do good things, to accomplish good works. So think about that in your own language in fundraising. Does your language offer them the chance to do good works? Or does it just ask them for money? Donors want to know, what happens if I make a gift? What will change? Or I made a gift. What happened? What changed? Does their gift do good? Does it help them to become rich in good works? Notice also that this is all about who the donor is becoming. Biblical fundraising enhances the donor's identity, not just, hey, we're really great as a nonprofit. We're such a great charity. So as you look at your conversations and your communications, who gets to feel rich in good works? Is it the donor, or is it just the ministry employees that are rich in good works? Biblical fundraising also enhances the donor's connection with the fellowship community, the koinonia, by asking to share, koinonikos, with the fellow community member. This is not detached giving away to the outsider. Also, biblical fundraising emphasizes reciprocity for the good things that God and the fellowship community have shared with the donor. Ordinary fundraising, it's more about just a disconnected transfer to outsiders. This passage is talking about giving. It's talking about giving big. Biblical fundraising boldly encourages rich, generous gifts of wealth sharing. Ordinary fundraising kind of timidly asks small and safe. By the way, this is an investment with real permanence. Biblical fundraising delivers lasting results, storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future. Honestly, you know what this is offering? It's offering the best life experience ever. Biblical fundraising delivers ultimate value to the donor, a superior life experience. Ordinary fundraising, just about getting cash to the nonprofit. All of these are a list that describes these amazing outcomes. Let me put it this way. Nobody wants this as an obituary. You made a lot of money. The end. who wouldn't want to trade it for this one? He really took hold of that which is truly life. He did a lot of good. He was so rich in good works. He was always generous and ready to share. He stored up for himself the treasure of a good foundation for the future. Isn't that offering a better deal? Shouldn't we be excited about offering that deal versus bury it and die with it? So instead of calling it major gift fundraising, I like to think of it as the ministry of wealth enjoyment. To get even more offensive, we help rich people enjoy their wealth. That's actually what the text is describing. Now think about that for a moment. If you were a high-capacity donor, and let's say you're touring the ministry, and you walk into the office, and above the office it says, Major Gift Fundraising. How does that make you feel? Ooh. They probably, I don't know if this is going to be uncomfortable if they've got some of their, metrics say what my capacity is and how this, okay. What if instead, above the door, it said, we help rich people enjoy their wealth? What? What's that? That sounds interesting. Tell me a little bit more about that. That's this ministry. So, which approach do we want to take with fundraising? Do we want the, what do you do? Oh, I ask people for money. Or, I help our donors get more enjoyment from their wealth. I share opportunities for gifts that match with their values and life history, that help them to accomplish real good, that help them to bring great beauty into the world, that help them to give well and joyfully, that deeply connect them with the mutual fellowship community. I help to find or construct giving opportunities that will create the most enjoyable, meaningful, and impactful life experience for donors. What is your role as a fundraiser? Interesting word that's used here translated as instruct. It's a two-part word, parangele. The biblical fundraiser comes alongside the wealth holder. That's the paraphrase, to come alongside. If you're familiar with paraclete, Holy Spirit, coming alongside, same idea there. So the biblical fundraiser comes alongside the wealth holder in a sincere relationship of ministry to deliver an authorized message. That's angele. Angel, the authorized messenger, that's the same word, about generosity. Now, if this were a military context, then we might translate that as command. In your ministry context, probably it is not going to be a command. And in fact, in his own fundraising, Paul explicitly writes, I'm not saying this as a command. Notice the difference from ordinary fundraising. Ordinary fundraising, sometimes it will beg from below. That's not coming alongside. Begging does not match with major gifts fundraising. Sometimes it will attack from above. Oh, those rich people, they should be giving and even more. And in fact, they've probably benefited from exploitation of the system, and they shouldn't even have the choice. So they should just raise taxes and all. That's kind of attacking from above. But most commonly what happens is just avoiding the wealthy. Oh, I'll just work with people who are like me. I wouldn't know what to say with them. Begging pairs with almsgiving. That's small gifts. Advising, coming alongside to deliver an authorized message about creating good works and sharing, that pairs with major life investment gifts. Notice some other things happening here. Biblical fundraising actually starts by talking about who the donor is. Starts by talking about the donor's identity. Why? Because they're going to give because of who they are. Ordinary fundraising, we want to start talking about our nonprofit's identity. They're supposed to give because of who we are. Notice the phrasing here. Sometimes in English it can read like an accusation. This is not an accusation. It describes a desirable, long-term, ongoing identity. That first phrase, not to be conceited, literally not to be high-minded. They're going to give. Why? Because they're not above the fellowship community. They are not high-minded. And now this actually references an in-progress, continuing process. It's a present infinitive. It pictures the action expressed by the verb as being in progress. And then it gets even more extreme with the next phrase, that we know that they have set their hope not on the uncertainty of riches, but on God who richly provides. That is a perfect tense, which in Greek expresses the present result of a past action. So this is something they've already done in the past. They have already, in the past, put their trust not in the uncertainty of riches, but in God who richly provides all things. How do we know that? Because this is a member of the church. They have joined this church of, in many cases, not a group of wealthy people, but they have riches, but they have decided to follow Jesus. So we know this about them, that they have already made this decision. So how does this sound like in a modern fundraising conversation? It communicates the message that you are the kind of person who makes gifts like this. It's a donor identity message. You know, Bob, one of the things I appreciate about you is that although you have wealth, you aren't conceited about it. You don't let it separate you from others. You have wealth, but you haven't set your hope in it. Instead, you have set your hope on God, who provides us with these things and even wants us to enjoy them. In fact, I think you might enjoy the good you could do by funding this exciting work. That's the notion that the donor's identity is going to motivate them to accept the challenge. This is actually a challenge that has a bit of a time limit on it. Now is the time to decide what to do with your temporary wealth. We see the uncertainty or disappearing nature of riches. We also see the reference to rich in this present world. That's literally those who are rich in the now time or in the now age. But here's the fun thing. Going back to that very earliest appearance of this passage in the Codex Sinaiticus, it actually doesn't say to those who are rich in the now age. It says to those who are rich at this opportune moment. Now, that's some real fundraiser language, and Paul was a real fundraiser. Now, if you don't have to accept this variation, because Paul actually references donors' abundance or wealth using this same phrase elsewhere in 2 Corinthians. In either case, we know that wealth is uncertain. It is disappearing. So the first thing that I want you to take from this passage is to hopefully feel a little bit empowered. Yours is a scripturally commanded ministry. You are an authorized messenger. You can come alongside the rich. These status differences, we know they're just temporary, they're tentative. You encourage wealth sharing, not just almsgiving. Frankly, you're offering the best deal ever. They get to enjoy their wealth. They get to do intrinsically good work. They get to create beautiful, visible good works. They get to become generous and sharing. They get to store up treasure for the future. They get to take hold of a superior life experience. Paul shares a great list of donor benefits, except it's not a list. It's a story. What is a story? Well, a story progresses through backstory and setting. These establish motivation from the main character's original identity, their people, values, and life story. There is going to be the call to adventure, the main character's challenge, which, although extreme, will at that point seem appropriate, and then the climax and the resolution. These show the main character's victory and ultimately altered identity. Who is the main character of this fundraising story? It's the high-capacity donor. To those who are rich in this present world, what is the main character's backstory? Well, we know his or her values. Not to be conceited is an in-progress, continuing process of not being above the fellowship community, not being high-minded. We know their life story. Already in the past, they have set their hope on. That has already been done, and they continue to feel the effects from that past action. We also know about their people. All of us together do this exact same thing. Now, we all haven't necessarily been blessed with wealth, but we all have the same choice to make with whatever it is that we're blessed with God richly supplies us with all things for the purpose of enjoyment, to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share. That's the people, that's the community. This is the main character's backstory. Reciprocity, paying it forward because they're not separated, not high-minded from the fellowship community, because they have placed their hope in God, who richly supplies, because they're following the fellowship community norm. This is what all of us do with whatever God happens to have richly blessed us with. What's the setting of this story? Setting's important. It sets expectations and what is normal behavior. This is the land of wealth sharing, not disposable income giving. Those who are rich, the uncertainty of riches, richly supplies, rich in good works, storing up treasure for themselves. What is the main character's challenge? What are we challenging them to do? Write a check. That's the challenge? No. The challenge is to enjoy what God has richly supplied. How is that a challenge? Because for this special ministry, the temptation is to bury it and die with it. That's your competition. Scripture is saying that's not why God gave it to you. God gave it to you to enjoy it. How? By using it to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share. Is this challenge urgent? Well, in any good story it is, and it is here too. You're rich, but only right now at this opportune moment. We know that your wealth is uncertain or disappearing, and it's definitely going to disappear at a certain point. Your wealth ownership goes away. Why is this extreme challenge appropriate? Well, because we're talking about wealth, not disposable income. It's disappearing anyway. You're moving it to a different investment type. You're becoming rich in more ways. You've received all of it from God to start with, and it's what we all do with God's various blessings in the fellowship community, and frankly, it's how you get the most enjoyment out of your wealth. What is the main character's victory in this story? To do good, to be rich in good works, storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future. And finally, what is the main character's altered identity at the end of the story, the resolution? Well, it changes their identity. They get to be something. They're not just being rich, now they get to be rich in good works as well. They get to be generous so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. So we look at this as a story. It is the donor's story overview. It has a backstory. It has a call to adventure. There is a climax. There is a resolution. This is the donor's story overview. And I want you to think about, is your major gifts fundraising missing any of these story elements? Do you have a call to adventure? Is that call to adventure connected with the donor's backstory, their identity from their people, their values, and their life story? Is your story set in the land of wealth sharing? Does it result in a victory that the donor wins? Is there a resolution that confirms the donor's enhanced identity? Well, we're going to have, after a half-hour break or so, we're going to have some time to dive into how we do that storytelling in a very practical, face-to-face ministry type of relationship. So I'll just end with, as we have time for a break, a little bit about what connects with you. What do you think? What do you like or not like about this approach? Does anything that's found here change or reinforce what you feel about the fundraiser's role, the fundraiser's relationship, or the fundraiser's message? That's the end of my time before the break, but after that, we will talk more about the nitty-gritty of how we actually have these conversations. So I'll turn it back over to you.
We're going to ask that you come back in 30 minutes. We'll start about 2:40. We have 2 more sessions this afternoon. What we're going to see this afternoon is he's building upon these great principles. So thank you for being here. Thank you for coming right back in 30 minutes. We'll see you then.